Bon après-midi. Comme on est dans la salle Londres, je vais faire ma présentation en anglais. Mais si après vous aimez avoir quelques informations de plus en français, ce sera un plaisir pour vous aider. I would like to talk about cognitive precision as an important competence when we are in an era with AI. But let me maybe start by asking you a few questions. Who in the room does, no, let me put it in the other way. Who does not use ChatGPT today? Who has never used it? Everyone? And who has already looked under the hood of ChatGPT? Do you know how it works internally? Who knows how it works internally? One person there, another one. So I'll take you a little bit into that, how it really works internally and what that means to us as users. But before that, let me take you back to 1984. That was when I finished my studies as engineer in chip design. I was working at that moment on the design of CCD chips. It's the thing which was very new then, but that you still find today in your iPhone. Back in those days, we knew that this was going to change the industry quite a bit, but we didn't have a clue that it would wipe out a complete industry. And more importantly, a lot of jobs have completely changed because of that. I had as a hobby photography as a teenager, and I remember that we made those pictures with a magnifier in a darkroom. But today, we do that just on a laptop. It has changed completely. Now, obviously, today, I'm not talking about CCD cameras. We look at AI. And to be really honest, I'm very skeptical when people talk about AI. Because a lot of companies sell their products and services and they call it AI. But when I look into it, how it really functions, it's still old-style programming. It's still programming like, if this happens, then do that. It's the programmer that defines what input will create what output. That's not intelligence. But when I looked into what we call today generative AI, or those neural networks, I have to admit I was absolutely flabbergasted. This is totally new. It's a new technology. It will change how we work. It will change a lot of industries. You all know that. But what interested me is, how does that change what competencies will be important in the future? So, and the point I'd like to make here is that the competence, or one of the competencies we'll need, is what I call cognitive precision. It will be important for AI, but it's also something that is already very important today. By getting better at it today, there's many things like communication that we can do a lot better. But let's first have a look in under the hood of AI. How does it really function? Basically, this represents ChatGPT in a very simple format, and you ask it a question with some context. And basically, the first thing that happens is this goes through a decoder. You have your text that will encode the information into a number of tokens. These are just numbers. And mostly, one word becomes one number, but sometimes, like you see here, competencies will be two tokens. So the same tokens will be used for competition, the compet, or for frequencies, the end of the word. So the tokens even don't correspond to a word. Then those tokens go into this neural network, and out comes a new set of tokens that goes through a decoder, and that decoder will decode it or translate it into text. And that text is really very human-like. It's incredible what this really does. Now, where does all that information come from? Because internally, these are just mathematical calculations. How does this work? And this is what you know as machine learning or deep learning. And what actually happens is the system is fed with some sequences of words from the internet, and it will produce a next word. It will calculate a next word. At the beginning, that word is just a random word. It's totally wrong. But by comparing the output with what it's supposed to be, the system will then adapt itself, and the parameters in the system will be adapted one by one. This is done over and over again, millions of times, with, what is it, ChatGPT 3.5 is almost 600 gigabytes of information, and then the learning is done. You can take away the whole learning thing, and you can start to ask questions, a question with some context, and get an output that is so human-like, that looks absolutely, well, correct, logical. The system really reasons, the system can really think, or at least that's what it looks like. Anyhow, it's human-like. Let's now have a look at what happens in the human brain. And what I've taken here is, you probably know this model. Who has read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman? You heard about it. I'll really simplify it, but our brain has different processes, two processes that work simultaneously all of the time. One is called fast thinking, system 1. The other is called slow thinking, system 2. Fast thinking is, well, our intuitive way of thinking. It's effortless, it's automatic, it goes very fast, but we make a lot of errors in it. The other one, the slow thinking, is asks a lot more attention. It asks a high effort, self-control. It's very, very slow, but it's also much more reliable. And as you'll read in the book of Kahneman, of course, what happens, even in our logical, slow thinking, we're always influenced by the fast thinking, and these are all the cognitive biases you probably heard about. Now, having looked at this, and going back to ChatGPT, how does ChatGPT think? Is it system 1, the fast thinking, or is it system 2, the slow thinking? And I hope with this short introduction that you see that it much more resembles our way of fast thinking. It's more an intuitive way of thinking, and it's not a rational, logical way of thinking. And indeed, because the only thing it really does is it calculates the statistically most probable next word based on everything it has learned before. If you look at it, it has no grammar. It has no logical rules. It doesn't know any mathematical principles. It doesn't even have a dictionary with the meaning of words. It doesn't know what it's really talking about. So it doesn't understand concepts. So if we say at the top right that this looks like real human reasoning, actually that's an illusion. It is much more like our intuition. And I did, like probably a lot of you, quite a few tests with ChatGPT. And one of the tests I did was this. I gave a short text to ChatGPT and I asked it, please elaborate this and make a long article or a presentation about it, so that I can send it to my boss, something more elaborate than just a short text. And what will my boss probably do? Well, the exact opposite. He'll ask ChatGPT to make a summary. And that will go on and on and on, won't it? So I did this like 5 times. And you probably recognize this, like we call this in French, le téléphone arabe. That it's exactly the same thing. What do you get at the end? Is a very nice, logical, convincing text, but that talks about something completely different. So this happens in ChatGPT as well. Each time it produces something, it slightly changes the meaning. So what will happen in the future? If you look OpenAI, it sells already its technology to all the companies. The neural network is the same for all the companies. So where can you make a difference? You can make a difference by having your experts having a training program for that system, and then you can make a difference for all other users to be really precise in the input they give and how they interpret the output. That will be your competitive advantage. And I'm not talking here about, you have already these trainings on how to write good prompts for ChatGPT. It's not about this. It's something much deeper. Let me give you one example. Let me take you back to the beginning of COVID. You remember those days, a lot of confusion on what we needed to do and all the communication around this. What was a good solution to fight COVID? How do you come to a good solution? Well, one way of doing it is looking at the context, at all the different variables we have, and then defining what is the problem we need to solve here. And let's look at that context. It was a very contagious virus. We had a quick geographical spread with so many infections, so many sick people, so many people hospitalized, so many deceased, etc., etc. So I could say that the problem, what is it? Well, it's the geographical spread. Or I could say, no, it's the number of sick people. Or we could say, no, it's the burden on the hospital system. Or maybe, no, it's the number of people that die. Isn't that the most important thing? But if you look at it, you can basically take any of these things as the problem to solve. But depending on what you take, the solution space changes completely. And what do you have when you have people sitting around the table, each with a different problem in their mind? You get discussions forever. But isn't that what happens already in management meetings today? You have endless discussions about a specific subject because everybody looks at it from another perspective. Defining what the problem is you need to solve is something that is very difficult to do and really requires an attitude and a training to do that well. So getting good at this is not only good for ChatGPT, it's already good today without ChatGPT. And that's the point I'd like to make. It's preparing for the future with already an immediate result in communication, decision-making, and collaboration. Let me give you another example. I work quite a bit with different companies, and here it's an example of pharmaceutical companies to make forecasting more precise. I mean, if you launch a new drug on the market, 1 year before, you need to know how many you will sell, because that's the basis for your logistics, manufacturing, etc. So basically, 1 year before, you think, okay, we're going to sell 100, and then 1 year later, you sell 100 plus or minus a certain error margin. Now, how big can that error margin be? What do you think is acceptable? 10%? 15%? 20%? In a study by McKinsey, they saw that worldwide, with all the pharmaceutical companies, the average error is not less than 73%. And it's, as you can see, the error is a lot bigger downward than upward. Now, why is that? It's because of the biases we have. First of all, there's the biases in the data that we use for our calculations, but then also it's our human biases, our cognitive biases, that influence our decision-making and our calculations. So getting better at this is something that we can already do today. And as you've seen, ChatGPT has the same type of biases, so understanding those biases will become even more important. I'll give you one last example, and this is, we train a lot of people at making good narratives for better presentations and making better reports. And we use this type of framework, we call it TLSM, that stands for Thinking, Logic, Story, and Media. Without going into too much detail, thinking is all about making the exercise meaningful. Meaningful for your audience, meaningful for yourself. The logic is all about making sure that it's coherent, that it's correct, that it's concise but still complete, and that you get rid of as much biases as possible. Then the storytelling is all about making it attractive, both from an emotional and from a rational point of view. And then finally, the media, obviously, is making the best possible layout and making sure that you have a nice and good production. Okay, so far so good. But what do we get as reaction from most of participants here is on the left side, they say, oh yes, Edward, this is really helpful. It's deepening my insights and it's improving my skills, but okay, it's not really new. I mean, we've trained people a lot on storytelling. We've trained people a lot on slides and PowerPoint, etc. But on the right side, they say, wow, this is a real paradigm shift. If only I had learned this 20 years ago, and every manager should learn this. This is totally new to many people. And it's just about logical thinking. Now, if you look, where can AI help us in this process? And if you look more closely, AI will be very helpful in the storytelling, in making slides, in writing the texts. But where AI is not that helpful is on the right side, is structuring the content, is coming up with meaning. And that is what we need to get better at. So the thing we are already not good at today is what will become even more important when we work with AI. And that is the point I wanted to make today, is that getting better at those things that we have on the right side is so important, not only for AI, but we can already start training people today because it already helps today. Now, what am I talking about? I made this term cognitive precision. It's like it's like a group, a bucket of a lot of different things. And maybe we can later on have a discussion what fits in there and what not. But it's things for me like this: critical thinking, logical thinking, dealing with cognitive biases, decision-making, having a good decision-making process, dealing with uncertainty and probability, something we're very bad at as human beings. Cognitive alignment, making sure that your whole team understands the thing in the same way. Dealing with data governance and data quality, things like that, and we might add other stuff as well. Now, I think if we're going to launch a training that says cognitive precision, you won't have a lot of participants, because everybody thinks that he can think logically and make good decisions. So my point is, and my advice is to most companies, if this will advance, is to integrate these concepts as much as possible into existing trainings. Ask your training providers to have these concepts already in your current training programs. And I would like to end with this one statement that I hope has come across, is work on cognitive precision. You'll already have better communications, decisions, and teamwork today, and you'll prepare people much more for the future with AI. I would like to thank you for your attention. If you'd like to know more about this, well, get in touch. We have, on the same subject, a longer webinar beginning February. You can invite your colleagues to join us as well. And if we have some time for some questions, I would be glad to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay, and we do have a couple minutes for some questions, and we'll get a microphone if someone has a question. Anyway.
Any questions?
One in the back.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. So you mentioned that ChatGPT itself, if we can compare it to the competences that the human has, it's basically like very small value in it. But still, when we are when we see the advertisement of ChatGPT, or now, for example, Gemini by Google, we see that there is a comparison to human expert. And actually, the comparison is like human expert is quite close to the level of the competences that ChatGPT or Gemini has. What is your point of view about this? Why do we, is it like to make people worry, or?
I'm not saying that ChatGPT doesn't have a value. It's really useful for specific things. But my point is that its way of thinking is very intuitive. And it resembles much more as our intuitive and emotive way of thinking. And it's not like our slow thinking, where we use the grammar or the methodologies we've learned to really apply them. And when you work with ChatGPT, you'll definitely find that in some ways it gives information that looks very well thought through, but will real errors in it.
And in your opinion, when we are working with a human expert, is he giving us advices or looking at situation with a fast thinking or slow thinking?
Human experts absolutely have their intuitive thinking as well. And they are subject to cognitive biases as well. So if you're working with experts or you're making a strategy with your company, making sure that you know what cognitive biases exist within the group is so important to deal with that. But even experts have their cognitive biases, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Other questions? And one follow-up, if I can ask on, based on what you just said, is one of your concerns, the leading question, but why not, is one of your concerns that similar biases, when there are similar biases between humans and machines, if it comes from a machine, that it's interpreted by the person as being more official or more, definitive than, if you and I are having a conversation, I know you know what you're talking about, but I'm not necessarily thinking every fact has been fact-checked.
Yeah. At least in my experience, when I work with many companies, I get this impression that when it comes out of a machine, and certainly if it's called AI, it must be correct. That is definitely a point. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. No, that was kind of the fear that I've had too, is that people take that to be so definitive, and so the same bias in a person is not going to necessarily have the same consequences as that bias in a machine, because people in a conversation know enough to kind of think like, well, yeah, David knows his stuff, but he's just here in front of people. He doesn't have, the entire web in his head, fact checking everything before he says it. And ChatGPT gives the feel as if it will, but it is not in fact doing that. And so things are easily interpreted differently.
So if you look at that model with the left and the right side, actually ChatGPT helps a lot more in the creative part. But when it comes in the part where you really need to think through your concepts and your ideas, there ChatGPT is much less useful. So if you use it for the right ways and you interpret correctly what comes out of it, then it can be very useful.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mentioned
another question over
questions. Let's go over here.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, I was looking at the list of the skills that you need to have for cognitive precision. How are they different from just maybe more general, like academic skills that you sort of develop at uni?
I don't think they're fundamentally different. I think a lot of these are taught in an academic environment, but not so much in a company environment. People tend to assume that this is already known. While I see in the work that we do with companies, it's an eye-opener for many people in how you structure your thoughts to make a good decision, or how you structure your thoughts to make a good presentation or a good narrative. So reinforcing and repeating that training in how to build the logical reasoning, how to check for cognitive biases, certainly still makes sense. But it's not different essentially from what is in a lot of academic courses. Any other questions?
I think that's it. And I think we're just about out of time. So thank you once again. That was really interesting to hear.
Thank you.